Montana Territory, August 1881, the wind tore across the high plains like it had a score to settle, kicking up dust and ghosting through the broken boards of a half-burned barn. Wade Dempsey tightened his grip on the reins, squinting against the sunlight. A thin trail of smoke curled into the sky just past the cottonwoods, and that was never a good sign out here. He had not planned on stopping. His wagon was already a day behind, loaded with supplies for the new line shack his brother was building up near Fort Shaw. But something about the way that smoke drifted slow, wrong made his stomach twist. He clicked his tongue and turned his gelding off the trail, guiding the wagon toward the ruin of what used to be a small homestead. The smell hit him before he reached the fence. Burned wood, charred leather, and something worse underneath. He jumped down from the wagon and stepped over the broken gate. The cabin was mostly gone, nothing but blackened beams and ash piles. A child's wooden horse sat half-melted in the dirt. Wade's chest tightened. He moved fast now, eyes scanning, then he heard it. A cry sharp and high from somewhere around back. He ran, boots pounding the scorched earth, drawing his revolver as he rounded the corner. There, crouched in the shadow of a root cellar, was a woman, hair tangled, face streaked with soot, a rifle clutched in her hands like she meant to take on the whole world. Next to her were two small children, a girl and a boy, both pressed close and silent except for the boy's whimper. Wade stopped. "Easy," he said, lowering the gun. "I am not here to hurt you." The woman's eyes were wild. "Who are you?" "Name's Wade Dempsey. I saw the smoke. Thought maybe someone needed help." She studied him, jaw tight. The rifle did not lower. "I have water," he said, "and food. You and the little ones look like you need both." The rifle dipped slightly. She looked down at the children. The girl, maybe 5, clutched her dress. The boy looked younger, maybe 3. "They haven't eaten since yesterday." Wade nodded slowly. "I have jerky and bread in the wagon." "Come on." She hesitated, then stood, ushering the children forward. Wade walked ahead, letting her decide whether to follow. When he reached the wagon, he pulled out a canteen and handed it back without turning around. She took it in silence. Once the children were eating, Wade sat on the edge of the wagon. "What happened here?" The woman looked at the ground. "Raiders, 3 of them, came through 2 nights ago. Your husband, dead," she said flatly. "He tried to hold them off." Wade nodded, his jaw clenching. "You buried him?" "Could not. They burned everything." He glanced toward the charred ruins. "You got a name?" "Sadie Bell." "And the kids?" "Virginia and Victor," she said, smoothing the little girl's hair. "They are not mine." Wade raised an eyebrow. Sadie looked up, eyes tired and bleak. "They were left with us last spring. Their parents never came back. So you stayed. They needed someone, and now—" Her voice cracked. "Now everyone is gone." Wade looked at the children. Victor was falling asleep against her shoulder. Virginia was chewing slowly, eyes on the horizon like she half expected more trouble. "Come with me," Wade said after a moment. Sadie looked up. "What?" "I am headed north. My brother's got a place near Fort Shaw. It is safe. You can rest there. Figure out your next move." "I do not have a next move," she said, voice low. "Then start with that." She did not answer right away, but when Victor began to cry softly in his sleep, she looked down at him, then at Virginia, then back at Wade. "You sure?" He nodded. "I would not offer if I was not." By sundown, they were loaded into the wagon, the children wrapped in blankets, Sadie sitting stiffly beside Wade with her rifle across her knees. The ride was quiet except for the creak of the wheels and the occasional snore from Victor. They made camp on a bluff that night, the fire low and the stars sharp above them. Wade cooked beans and coffee, watching as Sadie ate slowly, like she was not used to being hungry but just not sure what to do with comfort. "You sleep," he said, as she tucked the children into a bed of quilts. "I will stay up." "I do not sleep much," she said, still. "Try." She nodded once and lay down beside the children. Wade leaned back against a rock and watched the fire. He could feel her watching him, even with her eyes closed. In the morning, they packed up and continued north. Each mile stretched quiet and heavy, but not strained. Wade found he did not mind the silence. There was something steady in the way she moved, the way she looked after those children like they had always belonged to her. By the second day, Victor had taken to sitting on Wade's lap while he drove, clutching the reins with tiny hands. Sadie laughed once, low and surprised, when Wade told him he was a natural. He liked her laugh. By the fourth day, Sadie was asking about Wade's brother, about the land up near Fort Shaw, about Wade himself. "I was raised in Missouri," he told her. "Lost my folks to fever, came out west young." "Why stay?" He looked out at the horizon. "Because there's room out here to be what you want. To start again." She was quiet for a while after that. They reached the Dempsey line shack just before dusk on the sixth day. Wade's brother Thomas came out to meet them, all broad shoulders and a booming voice. After a few quick introductions, Thomas gave Sadie and the children the spare room. Wade helped her carry in their things, what little they had left. That night, Wade sat on the porch while Sadie stood just behind the screen door. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You do not have to," he said. "I want to," he turned. "You going to stay?" Sadie looked out at the stars. "I do not know, but it feels like I can breathe here," he nodded. "Then stay a while. No one's asking for more than that." She smiled, small and real. Wade felt something shift in his chest. He had not expected her, had not expected to care, but here she was, and he did. The first frost came early that year, feathering the grass with silver and curling the edges of the cottonwood leaves into brittle fists. Wade rose before the sun most mornings, loading the wagon for supply runs or checking the fence line where elk had been pressing through at night. Sadie often met the day not long after, her shawl drawn tight against her shoulders, her breath showing pale in the air as she stepped barefoot onto the porch to shake out the quilts. She moved through the mornings with a quiet steadiness, tending to Virginia's tangled braids or warming Victor's boots by the stove before he woke. Wade noticed the way she'd begun to hum absent-mindedly, never a full tune, just a measure here and there, barely above her breath. It was the first sound he'd heard from her that wasn't tied to grief or necessity. One afternoon, after Wade returned from hauling hay from the lower pasture, he found her kneeling in the dirt beside the barn, sleeves rolled to the elbow, coaxing late shoots of turnip greens from the cold ground. Virginia knelt beside her, mimicking her movements with a solemn earnestness. "You'll get frostbite digging like that," he said, setting down the feed sack. "I've got blood in my hands again," she said, brushing soil from her palm. "Feels like something." He crouched beside her, watching the way her fingers worked, careful, methodical. "You ever plant before? We had a garden when I was a girl. My mother grew sunflowers tall as the eaves. My father said they were useless." She paused, tracing the rim of a clay pot with her thumb. "They made her smile, though." He didn't reply, only handed her a folded scrap of canvas to kneel on. She took it with a quiet nod. Later that week, Thomas rode out to Helena for lumber, leaving them the place to themselves. Wade used the time to teach Victor how to stack firewood and helped Virginia build a hoop from willow twigs. Sadie kept mostly to the kitchen, but each evening she lingered longer on the porch once the children were put to bed. Wade sometimes joined her, and they sat shoulder to shoulder without needing to fill the silence. One such night, as the stars pushed through the velvet dark, she pulled a piece of mending from her lap and spoke without looking at him. "I was married 4 winters," she said, her voice low. "He was a schoolteacher, thought he'd found purpose when he moved us west." Wade waited. Didn't take long for the land to break him down. He drank, started gambling when the money ran thin. "I stayed because I thought maybe I was the thing that would hold him together. You don't owe him anything now." "I know that." "Doesn't make it less of a scar." A pause passed between them, filled with the rustle of dry leaves and the low chorus of crickets. "They came to collect on his debts," she said, her hands stilling over the fabric. "He'd signed everything over house, stock, and me." "I didn't know until they came." Wade turned toward her, his chest tightening. "I was sold to a man who ran a place down in Miles City," she said, her fingers curling around the thread. "A brothel, though he called it a boarding house. I was there a year. Then the man who bought me died in a card game." His cousin let me go, said I'd bring bad luck. He said nothing, afraid that anything he offered might shatter the quiet strength in her voice. I left with nothing but the dress on my back and the name I was born with. She looked up at him then, her eyes steady. That's the truth of it. I'm not afraid of truth, he said. She nodded once, then bent her head to the mending again. By the end of October, the children had taken to calling Wade Mr. Dempsey. Though Victor sometimes forgot the Mr. and shouted his name from across the yard when he spotted a jackrabbit or a hawk wheeling overhead. Wade never corrected him. One morning, Sadie found him in the barn oiling his saddle. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her shawl slipping from one shoulder. "You always this quiet?" she asked. He glanced up. "Only when I'm around someone I'd rather listen to." She stepped inside, her boots crunching over stray feed kernels. "I used to talk too much. My mother said I was born with a tongue that didn't know when to rest. You've earned your rest," she smiled faintly. "And what about you?" "What did you earn?" He ran the cloth along the leather, watching her, still figuring that out. "I think you already know, you just don't say it." He set the saddle aside. "What do you think I know? That you're not just passing through?" She stood there, her hands folded at her waist, eyes holding his like she was bracing for something. He stepped closer, the barn quiet but for the slow shifting of horses in their stalls. "I'm not," he said. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering a line of dry corn stalks across the yard. Inside, neither of them moved. That night, she baked bread, the smell filling the house with something warm and close to familiar. After the children were asleep, she offered him a slice, still warm, wrapped in a cloth. "I never said thank you," she murmured. "You don't owe me that. I do, not just for the ride or the roof, for not asking more than I had to give." He took the bread but didn't eat it right away. "You gave more than you think," he said. In early November, a letter came from Thomas saying he'd be delayed in Helena until the end of the month. Wade read it by lantern light, then folded it and tucked it into his coat pocket. As the days shortened, Sadie began sewing by lamplight after supper, her stitches turning from mending to new things: small trousers for Victor, a wool dress with green trim for Virginia. Wade sometimes sat across from her, whittling or sorting through tack, and they'd talk in low voices about the land, the weather, the way the creek had frozen over shallow and early. One evening, after she finished hemming a shawl for Virginia, she held it in her lap, fingers still. "I used to think I'd never be seen again," she said. He looked up from the piece of leather he'd been shaping. "But you did," she said. "You saw me." He set the piece aside. "I did." Her voice dropped. "I see you too, Wade." The next morning, he rode into Fort Shaw alone. He was gone most of the day, returning after dusk with a sack of flour, a new set of mittens for Virginia, and a small wooden box tucked beneath his coat. He found Sadie in the kitchen, folding laundry. "I got something," he said. She looked up. He held out the box. She took it slowly, then opened the lid. Inside was a ring, plain gold, no stones, but solid and clean. She stared at it for a long moment, then met his gaze. "I'm not asking for yesterday," he said, "or anything you can't give. Just whatever days come after this one." Her fingers closed around the box. "You sure you want a woman with my history?" "I want you. All of it." She stepped forward, the space between them small and quiet. "Yes," she said. He reached for her hand, slipping the ring on her finger. She didn't cry. She didn't smile wide or laugh or gasp. She just looked at him like he was the first steady thing she'd seen in a long time and maybe the last she'd ever need. The snow arrived in the night, quiet and deep, covering the earth in stillness thick enough to muffle every creak of wood and whisper of wind. When Wade stepped out of the house in the morning, he found the world changed, fences softened, hoofprints vanished, the mountains in the west sheathed in white like bones under linen. Inside, the warmth of the stove held steady. Sadie stood at the table, her sleeves rolled, dusting flour across the surface while Virginia sat at her side, kneading a lump of dough with both hands. Victor crouched near the hearth, turning a carved horse in the ashes like it was galloping through smoke. Wade set down the water pail and drew off his gloves. Snow's already past the steps. Sadie glanced up, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek with the back of her wrist. We'll be shut in soon enough. Might as well make use of the oven while it holds heat. He watched her shape the dough into rounds, her movements easy now, practiced. She didn't rush anymore. Whatever need had once driven her to keep moving, to always be doing something, had eased into something steadier. Storm'll last a while, he said, wrapping a strip of hide around his boots again. We'll need to bring in more wood before nightfall. I'll help after this rises. He nodded and turned to stoke the fire. It was a small moment, but they had a rhythm now, not rehearsed, not forced, just theirs. That afternoon, while the children napped, Sadie followed him out to the lean-to, scarf tucked under her chin, axe in hand. Wade split logs while she stacked them in the sled, the snow falling in fine, dry sheets around them. You always liked the cold, she asked, tucking her mittens under her arms. Not much to like about it, he said, driving the axe through a knotty round. But it keeps folks honest. Can't pretend much when you're freezing. I used to think winter was cruel, she said. Now it just feels quiet. He handed her another split log and their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away, neither did he. That evening the wind came hard, rattling the shutters. Wade checked the latches twice, then once more after the lamps were out. When he returned to the bedroom, Sadie was sitting on the edge of the bed, combing out her hair with slow, even strokes. He stood for a moment just watching her. She glanced over her shoulder, then patted the space beside her. You ever wonder what we'd be if none of it had happened? She asked once he sat. He thought for a while. No, I figure wondering doesn't change what is. She set the comb down. I used to dream about running off. Long before it all went wrong, I'd wake up ashamed. Like even thinking it made me ungrateful. You weren't ungrateful, you were alone. She turned to face him, knees drawn up on the quilt. I'm not anymore. No, he said. You're not. They didn't speak again for a long time. Instead, they sat with the hush of snow pressing close around the house, the fire throwing soft light across the floorboards. When she finally leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, he wrapped his arm around her without question. The next morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Wade saddled the gelding to check the cattle farther down the slope. Sadie packed a small satchel of food for him without being asked: jerked beef, a heel of bread, and a half jar of beans wrapped in cloth. I'll be back before dusk, he said, strapping on his rifle. She adjusted his scarf without looking at him. Be careful. He nodded, then mounted and turned toward the pass. The herd had drifted farther than he expected, and it took most of the day to drive them back toward the upper pasture. By the time he returned, dusk had painted the sky in bruised reds and violet. Smoke curled from the chimney. The sight of it settled something in his chest. Inside, Sadie was rolling yarn into a tidy ball while Virginia read aloud from a small book Wade hadn't seen before. She looked up as he stepped inside. Everything all right? She asked. Cattle are fine, lost a fence rail, but nothing worse. He unlaced his boots while Victor came toddling over, arms raised. Wade lifted him easily and set him on his shoulders. The boy laughed, tugging at Wade's hat. That night, Sadie set a small cedar box on the table after supper. Inside were 6 letters, folded and tied with a pale ribbon. They were in the bottom of my sewing basket, she said, her voice even. Letters I wrote to my sister after I was taken. Never sent them. Wade looked at her, then at the thin paper. She lives in Kansas, she continued, or did. Haven't heard from her since the war ended. Do you want to find her? I don't know, she said, but I thought maybe. If I read them, I'd remember who I used to be. You're not who you used to be. No, she said softly, but I'm not lost either. They sat at the table while she unfolded the first letter. Her voice was steady as she read, but her hands trembled slightly. When she finished, she folded it again and didn't speak for a while. You want me to help you find her? Wade asked. One day, she said. But not yet. Winter held fast. The snow deepened. Wade and Sadie fell into a rhythm marked by small things checking the traps together. Teaching Victor to count using smooth stones. watching Virginia trace letters with the tip of a stick in the frost-covered windowpane. Sometimes they would share a blanket in the evenings and speak in low tones while the children slept. Sadie told him about her mother's singing voice, how it used to carry across the wash when she hung laundry out in spring. Wade told her about the Missouri woods, about the hollow tree where he once buried a carved whistle he'd made at 11, convinced it held some kind of magic. They never spoke of the brothel again. One morning, near the edge of March, Sadie found Wade in the barn brushing down the mare. "I want to marry you," she said. He looked up, surprised, but didn't speak right away. "I know you already asked," she said, stepping closer. "But I need to say it back, not just yes, I want it, I want you, not out of safety, not for the children. Just because it's you." Wade set the brush aside, then reached out and took her hands. "Then marry me in spring," he said. "When the creek thaws and the cottonwoods bloom." She nodded, eyes bright. "I will." They stood there in the light filtering through the boards, her fingers curled around his, the mare shifting quietly behind them, no vows spoken yet, no preacher called, but it was settled. That night, as the moon rose over the snow-packed hills, Wade lay beside her, her head tucked beneath his chin, and listened to her breathing slow. He thought of all the roads that had brought her to him, and all the ones they would walk together now. Not because of what had been taken from her, but because of what she'd chosen to become, because she had found her way back, and he had loved her every step. By late March, the thaw had begun. The creek behind the line shack broke open with a low groan one morning, ice giving way to dark water that moved sluggish but sure toward the Missouri. Deer tracks reappeared near the tree line, and the air carried that wet, root-deep smell of earth waking up. The snow shrank from the fence posts and cleared from the south side of the barn first, where the sun lingered longest. Sadie stood at the window just after dawn, watching the sky shift from slate to rose. The ring Wade had given her caught a sliver of morning light as she reached to open the latch. Cold air slipped in, but she didn't mind. It smelled of something clean and new. She didn't wake Wade. He was still beneath the quilt, arm flung over the empty space where she'd lain. Instead, she pulled on her boots and stepped outside, the ground crunching under her soles. The trees near the creek wore green tips now, shy and small. She walked slowly, arms wrapped around herself, not from chill but from the weight of the quiet. She reached the stone where they'd first sat when she arrived months ago, before the earth had gone white, before the children had laughed again, before her own hands had stopped shaking at night. She sat, drawing her knees up, and stayed there while the sun pulled free of the ridge. She didn't notice Wade until he knelt beside her. "You didn't leave your coat," he said, brushing a bit of bark from her shoulder. "I needed to feel it," she said. "The cold, the wet, just to know I'm still in it." He nodded, his hand resting lightly at her back. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and it'll be gone," she said. "All of this. The quiet, you, them, you won't," he said. "You're here." She leaned into him, and they sat like that until the sun finished climbing. Then she stood and offered her hand. "We should check the lower pasture," she said. "Might be time to let the cattle roam farther." They rode out after breakfast, Victor tucked in the sling Sadie had sewn from an old flour sack, Virginia bundled beside her on the saddle. Wade rode ahead, scanning the ridges for wolves. The cattle had begun to spread, noses low to the softening ground. A few calves had arrived early, and Virginia named each one with grave ceremony as they passed. By mid-afternoon they headed back, Sadie humming something unfamiliar, a tune she said she remembered from her girlhood. The sun warmed her back through her shawl as they rode slowly, Wade's horse falling in beside hers. "You ever think you'll want more?" he asked. She turned. "More than this, more land, more stock. Maybe a house with a second room." She looked toward the horizon where the foothills blurred into sky. "I think I'd like a porch that faces west," she said. "And a garden with onions and beans, a place for the children to read where the wind doesn't sneak through the walls." Wade smiled. "Then we'll build it, piece by piece." When they returned to the line shack, a wagon stood near the barn. Sadie stiffened until she saw the driver dismount, a woman older with a straw bonnet and a thick braid of white hair down her back. Wade stepped forward, hand resting near his belt but not on his gun. "Looking for Sadie Bell," the woman said, her voice hoarse from travel. Sadie stepped around the wagon, jaw tight. "I'm her sister," the woman said. "Name's Ellen." Sadie didn't speak at first, then she nodded once. "I wrote you," Sadie said. "I know," Ellen said. It took a spell to find the courage to come. Wade stepped back, giving them space. The children peeked from the doorway, wide-eyed. "I thought you were dead," Ellen said, her voice catching. "For years." Sadie's arms remained crossed, but her shoulders dropped a little. "I was close," she said. They talked into the evening, seated on the porch while Wade saw to the animals and the children played in the yard. Sadie didn't raise her voice, didn't cry, just listened as Ellen spoke of Kansas, of a husband lost to fever, of a son who'd gone east to be a telegraph clerk. She had no one left, she said. Just a wagon and a few tools and the memory of a younger sister with wild hair and a laugh that could rattle windows. "I'm not the same," Sadie said at last. "I didn't come looking for the past," Ellen said. "Just for you." They sat in silence after that, watching the sky fade. That night, Wade found Sadie standing by the window after the children were asleep. Ellen had taken the spare bed, her snores rising soft and steady from the other room. "I don't know what to make of it," Sadie said. "You don't have to," Wade said. "Not tonight." She turned to him, her face caught between weariness and wonder. "You think people can really start again?" she asked. "Even after everything," he crossed to her, resting his hands at her waist. "I think you already have. Spring came in fits and starts." A week of warmth would give way to sleet, then back again to green shoots and muddy roads. Ellen stayed, helping with chores, showing Virginia how to knit, and teaching Victor the words to old songs Sadie had long forgotten. Some days, Sadie watched her sister with a kind of quiet amazement, like she was trying to remember how to trust someone who shared her blood. One afternoon, Sadie and Wade rode out to the edge of the property where the land dipped toward a bend in the creek. They sat beneath a cottonwood surveying the field. "This is where we'll build," Wade said. "Come summer," Sadie nodded, running her fingers over the grass. "It'll take time," he said. "And money. I don't care if it's one board at a time." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a land claim signed and sealed. "I filed it last week," he said. "It's ours now." She took the paper, hands steady. "You're not waiting on anything," she said. "I waited long enough," he said. She didn't cry. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she leaned over and kissed him, slow and sure, like it was something she'd been holding onto for a long while. The wedding came in May under the same cottonwood. No preacher, just Thomas back from Helena and Ellen standing with the children. Sadie wore a pale blue dress she'd sewn herself. Wade wore his cleanest shirt and a new vest Ellen had made from wool she'd traded for with a neighbor. They said the words with hands clasped, voices steady. No grand declarations, just the promise to stay, to build, to begin again. Afterward, they ate bread and stew, and the children chased each other through the tall grass. Sadie danced once with Virginia, then with Wade barefoot in the dirt, her laughter catching on the wind like birdsong. That night, as the stars came out clear and close, they sat on the porch of the lined shack, shoulders touching. "You know what I want," she said. "Tell me." "A row of plum trees," she said, "and a rocking chair and maybe one more child." He turned toward her, quiet for a moment. "You think we're ready?" "I think we already are." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. They said nothing more. The wind moved through the grass. The moon rose, and the quiet between them held everything they needed. They had made it through fire and snow, through silence and loss. What waited ahead would not be easy, but it would be theirs, together. The days lengthened with the season, light stretching slow and gold across the rising beams of their new home. Wade drove stakes into the ground with a quiet rhythm, his shirt damp at the collar, dust clinging to the sweat at his temples. Sadie passed him a water gourd without speaking, her hands still smelling faintly of the pine resin she'd used to seal the window frames that morning. "I think the porch should run along the west side," she said, "so we can see the sun fall behind the ridge each night." Wade took a long drink before answering, "And a bench under the eaves, that way we can sit out even when the rain comes." They didn't need to say more. Since the wedding, they'd fallen into a kind of unspoken planning, each decision building on the last, like they were tracing the shape of a life already half-lived. It wasn't just the house. It was the future they were laying plank by plank, nail by nail, with the same quiet certainty that had carried them through the hard months. Ellen and the children were at the creek, collecting smooth stones for the hearth Sadie had designed. Victor had grown surer on his feet, his voice louder, his silences shorter. Virginia had taken to reading aloud from the stack of old newspapers Thomas had brought back from Helena, her voice clear and serious, as though she believed each word might change something if spoken just right. Sadie brushed a strand of hair from her cheek and glanced at the skeletal frame of the house. "Do you think we'll finish it before the end of summer?" "We'll finish it before the first frost," Wade said. "Even if I have to sleep out here every night to get it done." "You're not sleeping out here," she said, her mouth twitching. "You run cold." He reached for her hand, not saying anything to that. Later that evening, while the children slept in the loft of the lined shack, and Ellen mended a pair of worn gloves by the fire, Sadie brought out a bundle of linen she'd kept tucked at the bottom of her cedar chest. She spread it across the table, smoothing the corners with care. Wade looked up from the ledger he'd been marking. "You planning a fair?" he asked. "I want to make curtains for the new windows," she said, "but I need help measuring." He stood and crossed to her side, touching the fabric. "Where'd this come from?" "I bought it from a trader in Fort Benton 2 years ago. I thought I'd use it for a dress, but it never felt right. Now it does." She measured twice, then handed him the scissors. As he cut, she held the fabric taut, her eyes following the blade. "I didn't think I'd care about curtains," she said softly, "but now I want them to be just right. They will be." She didn't speak again until the last panel was cut. "What do you think you'll miss most once we leave this shack?" he thought for a long moment. "The way the roof creaks just before a storm, and the sound of you walking barefoot across the floorboards in the morning." She smiled without looking at him. "I'll miss the way the light lands on the stove right after sunrise. And the knot in the wall where Victor keeps hiding his rocks." 2 weeks later, Thomas returned from Helena with a wagon load of cedar planks and tin flashing. He brought news. A teacher was coming to the fort, and with her, the possibility of a small school opening by autumn. Sadie listened quietly while she stirred the stew, her thoughts already working ahead. That night, after the fire died down and Ellen had taken the children inside, Wade sat on the porch with Sadie, the stars sharp above them. "You thinking of sending Virginia?" he asked. Sadie nodded slowly. "She's ready. She knows more than she lets on. She's just waiting for someone to open the door. She'll be the first one through it." Sadie turned her gaze toward the half-built house. "I want her to have something I didn't, something steady." "You've given her that already." "More than she'll ever know." Sadie looked at him then, her eyes catching the starlight. "What about you? What did you want before all this?" He leaned back, arms resting on his knees. "I wanted silence for a long time, after Missouri, after the trail. I thought if I could just find a place quiet enough, I could let everything go." "Did you?" "No," he said. "Turns out I didn't need silence. I needed something that made the noise worth bearing." She reached for his hand, her fingers warm and calloused. "I think I did too," she said. By mid-June, the walls of the house were up. The roof sloped clean toward the south, and the porch stretched wide across the front, just as Sadie had imagined. Victor helped Wade hammer in the porch railings, proud of the bent nails Wade let him claim as his own. Virginia painted the window trim blue, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. On the morning they moved in, Sadie brought in a small bundle of dried lavender and hung it from a nail above the hearth. Ellen placed a tin kettle on the new stove and declared it good luck. The children ran from one room to the next, laughing in that unguarded way children do when they believe the world is finally theirs. Later, as the sun slipped behind the far ridge, Wade and Sadie stood in the doorway. The air smelled of warm wood and dry earth. From the porch, they could hear Ellen's low voice as she read to the children from one of her Kansas books. "You did it," Sadie said. "You built it?" "No," he said. "We did." She turned to him, her face open, unguarded. "I never thought I'd have this." He brushed his thumb along her cheek. "You built it long before I came along. I just put up the walls." She took his hand and led him inside, their steps quiet on the new floorboards. They sat together by the hearth, not saying much, just listening to the fire settle into its rhythm. That night, after the children had gone to sleep and Ellen had retired to her corner room, Wade and Sadie lay in their bed, the window open to the breeze. She traced the line of his shoulder with her fingertips. "I think the land's going to hold," she whispered. "It feels rooted." "It is." She rested her head against his chest. "And I think I am too." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You always were. You just needed time to see it." In the months that followed, the house filled with small things: a rocking chair Sadie found at a trading post and repaired herself, a set of shelves Wade built for Virginia's growing collection of books, a woven mat Ellen made from old feed sacks. The garden sprouted thick with the season's promise, and the plum trees Sadie planted behind the house began to show their first leaves. Victor learned to ride with Wade's help, clinging tight to the saddle as the pony plodded slow circles. Virginia started at the schoolhouse by the fort, returning each afternoon with dirt on her hem and questions about everything. Ellen stayed on, content in her room with the south-facing window and her evening walks down to the creek. One evening, as the sky turned copper and the crickets began their slow chorus, Sadie sat on the porch with a letter in her lap. It was from a woman in Miles City, someone she'd once known briefly, now running a refuge for women trying to leave the places Sadie had once escaped. "She asked if I could send her names," Sadie said, "women who might need help or a place to go." Wade glanced up from where he was sanding a length of wood. "You thinking of writing back?" "I already did," she said. "Told her I'd send what I could. And that I'd be here if anyone made it this far." He nodded once, no questions. Later, he found her standing barefoot in the grass just beyond the porch, watching the wind move through the plum trees. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what it means to belong. I used to think it was about safety or land, but maybe it's just about being seen, about someone choosing you even when you don't ask for it." He stepped beside her, arms loose at his sides. "I chose you the moment you pointed that rifle at me," she smiled, slow and full. "And I chose you when I let you hand me that bread." They stood like that as the sky deepened, the house behind them lit soft with lamplight, the land stretching wide and sure around them, nothing more needed saying. They were rooted now, not just to the land but to each other, to the life they'd built out of ash and silence and second chances. And every morning after, as the light spilled across the porch and the creek murmured its low song, Wade and Sadie rose together, side by side, ready for whatever the day would bring because the hardest parts had passed, and what remained was a life worth every step, every scar, every breath. Together, always.